Okay, I think with that, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. This is the Unique Perspectives panel. We hope you're enjoying your day so far. My name is Kaya Verich, and I am the Survivorship Program Manager at mHealth Fairview, and I will be moderating this session with my colleague, Linda. Linda, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome. So my name is Linda Mace, and I am a RN Cancer Survivorship Coordinator with mHealth Fairview. And I would like to introduce our panelists today, are Lewis Whitehead, Brandy Benson, and Miranda Johnson. So I'm just going to do a short bio on each one. So Lewis is a small business owner, musician, and author living in Brookings, South Dakota. He was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in August of 1999 at the age of 21 and underwent a successful allogeneic bone marrow transplant at the University of Minnesota in June of 2000. An Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee descendant, Whitehead is active in American Indian organizations and communities in South Dakota and surrounding states. So thank you for joining us, Lewis. And then I'd like you to introduce Brandy Benson. Brandy Benson is the founder and CEO of Resume Advantage, an employment service for civilians and transitioning military veterans. In 2009, after being diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, Ewing sarcoma, Brandy fought to overcome her diagnosis and heal after her treatments and reclaim her life through therapy, physical activities, and other healthy living practices. And thank you, Brandy, for joining us. And then I'd like to move on to Miranda Johnson. Miranda Johnson was diagnosed with 2B triple negative breast cancer in October of 2018, just after her 36th birthday. She and her husband had just welcomed her baby, and she unexpectedly found herself navigating cancer treatment with a newborn and also balancing a pre-existing chronic neurological disease. So I'd like to welcome Lewis, Brandy, and Miranda.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you so very much to our panelists for joining us today. One note, we do have just a little technical difficulty with Brandy, so she'll be joining us as soon as we're able to get her connected. But as we hear in their bios, Louie, Brandy, and Miranda have vastly different experiences in their cancer journey. We will be discussing cancer survivorship issues that are relevant for many, and then address some common fears and anxieties of cancer survivors. Most importantly, we hope that you find a community of survivors here and that you learn some things from the speakers and other attendees that you can take home and use in your daily life. There will be opportunities to submit questions to the panelists, so please feel free to enter the questions and comments in the box, in the Q&A box at any time.
So now, before kicking off, I wanted to share a few ground rules for our panel. The goal of this session is to help those in attendance to feel better, more hopeful, and not alone. We're not going to talk about specific diagnosis or treatments or give medical advice. We're not going to discuss side effect management, and we're not here to deal with practical problems like work, childcare, and medical system navigation. So, is everybody ready? Okay, so let's just get started with a big question for our panelists. I'd like to ask, what is your message about cancer survivorship? And how about if we get started with Miranda?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Miranda. When I think about my big message for cancer survivorship, it's that there's no right or wrong way to be a cancer survivor. I think that a lot of times in our culture, we hear stories of people who do really amazing things after going through something like cancer. So maybe they travel around the world, or they write a book, or they do something really incredible. And those people are so inspiring and needed and amazing. But if you're someone who finds that that's not you and you feel like you're not enough or less than, I just want to say it's okay too. Like, we need all types of people, and there's no right way to be a cancer survivor. One of my really good friends said a lot of times after going through treatment and cancer, she is a cancer survivor herself. She's found in talking with people, you can either have an explosion of dreams where you get really inspired to do a lot of things, or a distillment where you get really clear and maybe simplify your life. And that's been a little bit more of my experience. So I just wanted to share that if you are feeling pressure to be a certain type of cancer survivor, all are welcome, whether you're that go-getter or your life suddenly feels more simple and that feels right to you. I think both are, or any path is really beautiful after cancer survivorship.
Thank you, Miranda. That was beautiful, and I loved hearing that. Louis, do you want to go ahead? And so what is your message about cancer survivorship?
Certainly. Good morning, and thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm Louis, and kind of piggybacking off what Miranda just talked about, and that was a beautiful message. I don't know if I could have said it better than that, but I guess my view on survivorship is, like she said, there's no one size fits all, but also to just be prepared for the fact those who are just, especially those in the early stages of survivorship, know that in many respects, it's almost as though life gets cleaved in two. Like, there's life before the diagnosis and survivorship begins, and then there's after. And it's just, my biggest message is like, with this is true throughout life, but it seems like it becomes especially precious after diagnosis and such like that. It's just to, whatever this might mean for each individual person, is just to make the most out of life that one can, and just get as much enjoyment of life out of as possible, and do as much good as one can, and hopefully use the experiences we have through survivorship to be of service to other people, especially to other people who are going through similar things to what we've gone to, but also just to people generally. But also, I really want to emphasize the importance of self-care throughout the process. This is something that's going to effectively, once one enters into survivorship, presumably it'll last for the remainder of our lives. So just want to encourage everybody to take good care of themselves, and don't be afraid to ask for help, and to allow oneself to be helped if the need arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. That was very, very great message for us. And so I'd like to move on to Brandy. Brandy, what is your message about cancer survivorship?
Hello, can everybody hear me? Are we good? Okay, good. Whew. We're having some technical difficulties earlier. Like, oh my gosh, this is bad timing. Okay, so my message is, I'm gonna piggyback off of everybody. So definitely find your own way. Don't feel like you have to compare yourself to anybody. You know, everybody has their own journey. The healing process, it takes time, and we are all very different. So our roads of how we're going to be healing and what's going to be going on with us is all going to be different. So I think that's really important to acknowledge. And then I think it's also important to know that, like Louis was saying, you need to be kind to yourself. You just went through something extremely traumatic. So you need to know that it's going to take time to heal. It's going to take time to accept this new individual. It's going to take time to process what just happened, because sometimes it happens so quick and so fast. And in 1 minute you feel like you're okay, the next minute you're sick, and then you're finished with treatment. So it takes sometimes years to process all of this information. So just be kind to yourself, and also know that just because you had cancer in the past doesn't mean that it discounts the quality of your life. If anything, it kind of amplifies it a little bit more and makes it a little bit more oomph, because you know how precious life is. And in 1 minute you're healthy and well, the next minute you could be sick. So just making the best out of your second time around is, to me, really important, just to maximize your time here on earth. So be kind to yourself, and don't measure yourself up to anybody else's journey of healing.
Thank you, Brandy, for that oomph, right? Okay, so this conference, we are describing survivorship from the day of diagnosis through the end of life. Can you describe that word, cancer survivorship, from your perspective? Does that resonate, or is there a different word that might describe your cancer journey? And if there is a word, what would that be? Louis, I'll let you start this one, please.
Well, as far as that's concerned, being a cancer survivor, I know as we've talked about before, it's different for each of us. I don't, truth be told, I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. I always acknowledge that I'm a cancer survivor, but it's not something that I necessarily, and it's certainly a part of my identity, but at the same time, it's not something that's always front of mind in my interactions with other people. It's something that if it happens to come up in conversation, or if it's relevant, I'll bring it up, but otherwise, typically don't. But it's certainly an important part of my identity, whether it's kind of more at the surface level or kind of more below the surface. But as far as a more appropriate word or phrase, I've always thought that cancer survivor was certainly perfectly acceptable. So I think that's an apt description. Thank you.
Miranda, you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. Um, I definitely agree with what Louie was saying about it being a part of my identity, but not the first and foremost thing. But I think about when I was going through treatment, it felt a little bit different. So I remember reading that I could be called a cancer survivor from the moment of diagnosis. And that felt really empowering to me when I first read that, because it felt like I was part of this bigger community of people who had the after. And that was inspiring to me. Like maybe I won't always be in treatment, because at the moment it felt like I would be in treatment forever. It was 15 months of treatment, and that felt like a really long time. During treatment, I thought of it, instead of being a cancer survivor, I remember feeling like cancer was my job. So going to appointments, going to all the medical pieces, of course, but then also just like keeping my mind healthy and taking care of myself at home and managing side effects and all of those things. It just felt like more than a full-time job. So I talked about it like that. And then now I relate more to what Louie said, where it's a part of my identity. It's part of who I am. And sometimes it pops up when I'm not expecting it. And I'm like, oh, there, that triggered something, or that smell, or that certain coconut milk is something really weird that, like, for some reason I associate it with chemo. And a can of coconut milk, and I used to love it. So like these weird things will just trigger it and bring me back. But I guess that I'm saying all of that to say it kind of ebbed and flowed and taken new shape. Now that I'm 2 years out from ending treatment, it feels a little bit different. Yeah.
Great. And I do see, Linda, thank you. We could invite the audience here, and I see a couple are coming in. Warrior, Grateful. Brandy, feel free if you've got some additional thoughts to share here. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think the word cancer survivor is also really great, but I do feel like, I don't know where I heard it from somewhere, where they were saying that any individual who has gone through cancer, whether they've actually passed or they're still here, that everybody's still a warrior, everybody's still a survivor. We've all have faced the scariness of potentially dying, or have lost somebody. So I feel like it's just not about like physically surviving, like their legacy has still lived on. So I feel like, yes, it is great to feel like a cancer survivor, but I think it's beyond measures of just physically being here. It just feels like anybody who has gone through cancer is definitely a survivor, because it's extremely hard. They may have passed in the physical, but their legacy is still here, spiritually, and we still remember them and honor them with the runs and the events and stuff. So I think cancer survivor is an accurate term. However, I feel like it encompasses much more than just physically being here on this physical plane.
Oh, Linda, sorry, mute. Unmute.
There we go. Thank you. Those are all great inspirations for all of us. So I'm just curious about what led you to where you are as a cancer survivorship advocate, and why are you here today? And I'll go ahead and start with Miranda.
Yeah, so I'm new to this advocacy part of my journey. So when I wrapped up treatment, it was February 2020, and we all know in March 2020 the pandemic started. So the 2 years since I've been done with treatment have really been different for all of us. So now I think I'm just starting to to get into it. So maybe like a lot of people who've joined the panel, I'm sort of finding my way. I know that I've really enjoyed connecting with people and sharing my story. I've been able to do that through friends of friends who have reached out. So as a woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer under 40, people know that I'm out there. And then when they know someone who's around 40 or younger, and they'll reach out to me and ask if I'm willing to connect with that person. So that's one way that I've been an advocate. And also since I had a newborn, I was a first-time mom when I was going through cancer, as my bio mentioned. People who have young children or who are pregnant, I've connected with a couple of people, or even if that person wasn't ready to connect, just reaching out to their family to let them know, I got through it and here's what helped me. And that's been a really powerful part of my healing too, really. I try to make sure I'm really conscientious and put up good boundaries around myself and make sure I'm not giving too much of me, because I can do that. But I know that if I'm thoughtful about how I'm connecting, it feels like a really good experience. So that's been part of my journey. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Miranda, for sharing that. Louis or Brandy, either one of you want to contribute? So the question was, what has led you to where you are as a cancer survivorship advocate, and why are you here today?
I can
Brandy?
jump. Okay,
Thank you.
yeah. I didn't know if you know or who. Okay. So I am 13 years out and been in remission. I feel like I'm healed. So I don't like to say remission because I don't feel like it's coming back. So I've been healed for 13 years. And I honestly didn't know how I was going to become an advocate. I didn't know if my story was going to be, worth anything to share with anybody. All I knew was in the moments of being diagnosed with cancer and knowing that you could potentially pass away and going to be facing your own mortality in a sense, I knew it was really important to find hope. And I found that through looking for individuals that look like me, people that had similar cancers as I did, hearing those stories of hope. And I feel like that's what everybody does. When we're going through something traumatic or hard in life, we're looking for someone who's been there and has excelled and they're doing well in life. And they're kind of like a role model or an example of what could potentially be for you. So for me, being an advocate and spreading the awareness about Ewing sarcoma cancer or just cancer in general and early detection and, having a really strong support system and all of that great stuff, I just know that it's so important to put that out there because somebody out there has Ewing sarcoma cancer and they're looking for hope. And I just want to be that hope for that individual to let them know that life isn't over. Don't give up on yourself. Keep pushing. And there's these things called miracles out here, and they do exist because I was given 1 year to live, and that was 13 years ago. So don't give up. It's just so important that that message is being pushed and people know that we still have a chance, even though you have a cancer diagnosis. So that's why I advocate, because I just want people to know that you can get through this and life can be challenging, and that's life. But just because you have cancer doesn't mean it's the entire book. It's just the chapter of your story.
Thank you so much, Brandy. That's so inspirational. I think hope can resonate with all of us on this call today. Louis, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just have a couple of things to add. Again, kind of piggybacking on what Miranda and Brandy have already said. But for me, in terms of my advocacy and wanting to be supportive of others, a lot of it goes back to, well, part of it is in a lot of our traditional cultures, being of service to others and generosity like that is effectively a cultural imperative. So that's part of it. But a big part of the reason why I want to, for my advocacy and for my being here today and being able to share my story and talk about the experiences I've had is, in some respects, it's healing for me as well too, but I primarily do it because I'm hoping that in sharing my stories and sharing my experiences, I'm being of service to others who are going through similar things and such like that. When I was going through my cancer, it's not that I didn't have any contact with other survivors and such like that, but I certainly received a lot of support, not necessarily specific to the cancer or from an informational standpoint, but I just remember how meaningful and how important it was for me to have the support that I had during the time that I was going through that. And I really give a lot of credit to that for helping me with my survival, even this many years later, being 23 years out, but then also wanting to give others that kind of support that I received that was so meaningful and helpful to me. So that's the primary reason that I do it, is just a matter of if you want to call it paying it forward or giving back. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.
You guys, hope, service, and connection. Just amazing. Thank you all for sharing your stories. So moving on to the next question, self-advocacy is an often talked about topic in survivorship. And by definition, self-advocacy is arming yourself with the tools and skills necessary to feel comfortable with asserting yourself and communicating clearly about cancer care needs. And as we all know, there's many challenges to self-advocacy while in treatment or in survivorship. And what I'd like is to hear from each of you, what things were more natural for you in survivorship? And where did you struggle? Where are you continuing to work towards that self-advocacy? Sorry, Brandy, we'll start with you on this one.
I think it's really important that we have self-advocacy for sure. I struggled with it because I'm not gonna say there wasn't a lot of information on Ewing sarcoma cancer because I saw it online, but I never heard of the cancer before. I didn't know that you could get cancer anywhere in the body besides breast cancer, lung cancer, brain cancer, stomach cancer, like all throat cancers, like all the cancers that you hear about. So I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know, I was just so ill educated about this type of cancer. So trying to navigate my way around something that I had no clue about. And then the doctors were just like, this is extremely rare. You know, we don't think you're gonna live. I just didn't feel like it was much of a team effort because I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the questions to ask. I didn't know anything. I was kind of just flying by the seat of my pants and just going with whatever the doctors were telling me. But I think it would have been great if I felt like it was more of a team effort, but I just didn't have enough confidence or information or the right questions to be asking. But I definitely believe that it's really important to know that you have a say-so in your health treatment, in your healthcare, in your regimen of treatment, because it's ultimately it's you who's doing the treatment and getting the services done. So just being able to be a part of that, I think it's really important rather than being told what to do. I think it'd be great to be a team collective effort. Like, yes, I want to do this. This is what I'm going to be doing versus this is what you have to do. And this is the only choice that you have. So I think it's important just for us to speak up and to know that just because the doctors say, you know, this is what's going to be happening, there are second opinions. You can kind of rebuttal that. You can speak up for yourself because it's your life that's in their hands.
Great, thank you so much. Louis, you wanna take a turn at this one?
Sure. Well, one thing that was kind of different about my case as well, too, and part of it, I imagine, was because of my relative youth. I was 21 years old, 21, 22, 23 when all this was happening. And my parents were still very involved in what was going on, too. So I didn't have to do a whole lot of self-advocacy at that point. If there were any issues that came up, my parents typically did that for me, or especially my mother, and who did a lot of the advocating for me. But of course, since then, I've done that for myself. And thankfully, I haven't run into too many issues with that. The primary issues that I've run into, even this many years later, that's still related to the cancer, is some of the, and thankfully in much less intense ways than in the early days, but was more like the emotional and the psychological aspects of survivorship and such like that, and the challenges. And one of the biggest challenges for me with regard to that, and this is true in larger life as well too, but one of the barriers for me for self-advocacy and asking for help is, and maybe it's not even really all that relevant, maybe things just happen to fall into place, but with me, the challenge is always, especially when it comes to, rather than physiological things, but more emotional or psychological things, of it's hard to reach out when you don't really even know for sure what kind of help you need. So I'd say for me, in terms of self-advocacy and struggles with that, that's been the biggest struggle for me, both in the cancer journey, and again, that's true in larger life as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think, learning about yourself as part of this whole new system where you find yourself is the first step, and then using those tools to move forward. Miranda, do you have anything to contribute to this question?
Sure. So self-advocacy became important for me from the moment that I found the lump in my breast, because I was under 40 and I was pregnant when I found it. And my doctor at the time wasn't worried about it at all. So I kept bringing it up. And like it just wasn't listened to. No one was listening to me. No one was listening to me. And my story isn't unique for young women under 40. I've heard lots of people with a similar story who are diagnosed. So I learned, it's really important to just speak up and keep talking and keep asking and say like, no, I need help. I consulted with a lactation consultant and she got me in to be seen right away after I gave birth. And that's how I ended up getting diagnosed. And then ultimately, if I would have been seen at the other place, it was a different healthcare system, they would have gone through with a totally different treatment plan, which I think wasn't the right treatment plan. I feel so lucky. And I think what I want to say is, so I ended up at the U and I ended up with a care team that I just really trusted. And for me, that was the most important piece, because kind of like what Brandy said, I didn't know what I was navigating, and I needed to trust my care team to make the decisions and help guide me. And I loved that they kept me really informed and told me why they were doing what they were doing, but that I could trust them, because I was trying to take care of a new baby. I was trying to figure out how to schedule everything and how to be where I needed to be, and take care of myself and my mental health. And so it was really important. I think that was the key thing for me, was having, and someone had told me that if you have a care team you can trust, everything will be easier. And I just really, really solidly feel like I did and do. And that has been life-changing. And I just love them and I'm so grateful to them. So that's been a huge piece for me in self-advocacy, to feel like I didn't need to advocate as much as I had the experience of really, really, really needing to advocate and no one believed in me. So that was a huge contrast, and that was really, really helpful.
Thank you all for sharing that. And thanks to those of you that are chatting in your stories as well. We appreciate seeing and reading about your experiences.
Thank you so much. So one of the other questions we have is for Brandy. Please, we'll start out with Brandy. Please share the psychological and/or emotional aspects of your cancer survivorship, either in being a cancer survivor or getting to survivorship.
My mental health I was in denial for a really long time. I also was kind of feeling bad for myself that all of this was happening, that it could possibly come back. Then I had a lot of survivor guilt for a very long time, because I watched a lot of my cancer friends, and they were patients as well. They all ended up passing away. And, I kind of like watched every one of my friends pass away. So I had a lot of survivor guilt, and I just didn't know like why I was the one who got to survive. And there was like a brand new mother who Miranda, she had breast cancer. She'd just given birth to her child and she ended up passing away. And there was others that had like lots of children. And, I'm not that my life is not valuable, but I just felt like it wasn't fair that I got to live and that everybody else got to live or passed away. So for a while I struggled with survival guilt for a really long time, but I kind of just, I like to say that everything happens for a reason, I guess. And I'm here to service others now. And I guess that makes me feel better. But for a while, my mental health was not as great as it could have been. But once I kind of started focusing my energy and my attention to things that were more optimistic and more in my control, life got easier, things got better. My attitude changed towards life. And instead of feeling bad for myself, I started learning how to co-create with this new person that I was, because I think it's really important that people know that once you have cancer, life is changed and altered dramatically for the rest of your life. You're not going to ever go back to the pre-version of yourself. You're now post whoever you are. So you're a completely different person. You've experienced trauma. You've gone through chemotherapy. Some of you, survived guilt. You've watched your friends pass away, stuff like that. So I think it's just really important to know that you have to learn this new person, what they're good at, what you can do. What are your triggers now? Like, just how to work with this new person, getting treatment, going to therapy, physical therapy, just learning who this new person is, being kind to yourself and co-creating with that person. And you have a second chance at life and just really making it count and knowing that it's just as beautiful and great as it was before you had cancer. So working with yourself and being as positive and optimistic with your new life is really important. And that's helped me throughout my journey in life and post-cancer.
Thank you, Brandy. That was beautiful. Louis, would you like to add anything?
Yes, could you repeat the question again, please?
Yes, could you share your psychological and emotional aspects of your cancer survivorship?
Well, oh, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Either in being a cancer survivor or getting into survivorship.
Well, probably the biggest hurdle is probably getting into survivorship, in terms of the emotional and the psychological aspects. And part of it as well too is that, and I realize that not everybody is going to respond the same to situations like this, and there's no way to predict what's going to happen. One thing that was a challenge for me in going through this, again, fully knowing that not everybody is going to respond the same way, but of course, I knew a lot going into this, a lot about what would be happening or potentially happening to me physiologically and such like that. But there wasn't much discussion in terms of the possible psychological or emotional side effects of what happens. So when things really hit me, like especially when I had PTSD really bad, starting about 9 months after my transplant, it's kind of like getting hit like a ton of bricks. I mean, the situation was difficult to begin with, but kind of not really knowing that something like that might happen, or at least not having that information shared with me, that really made things a lot more difficult. And I don't know why I'm this way, but part of it is with me, I found throughout life, especially in a situation like this, for some reason, I'm one of those people where if there's a crisis, it's not that I don't experience emotions or don't and such like that, but it's more or less like all that just kind of subconsciously kind of gets pushed aside. And then once everything seems to quiet down and it seems like everything's going to be okay, that's when all of the really heavy stuff seems to come in. And like I mentioned, it tends to hit me like the proverbial ton of bricks. And so that was probably the biggest challenge for me emotionally and psychologically, was kind of everything at once. I mean, it was in some respects it was gradual, but it was also very sudden. It was also very unexpected, where suddenly all of the heaviness of and part of it might be related to all the chemicals that had gone through my body as well too, and coming off a lot of those things like the post-transplant meds, but just dealing with the post-traumatic stress disorder and such like that. And so, and again, it's a it's a journey that like cancer survivorship itself, it's a journey that continues and always continuing to refine and get better with that. But there's always still more healing to do for the most part. And I'm really thankful that I'm so far out from that now. And for the most part, I've gotten things under control. And if the PTSD does kind of creep back in, it's much less intense than it was in the early days, but still there are still challenges, but at least now I have better ways and more of a support system for dealing with that.
Great. Thank you, Louis, for those words of encouragement for others out there facing the same thing you guys have been facing. Miranda, do you have anything to add in regards to the psychological and emotional aspects of your cancer survivorship?
Both Louie and Brandy's answers were so beautiful. And I really like that idea of co-creating also. I'm just all like, oh, that's inspiring to me. And I'm going to put some thought into that for my own. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so I'm a little closer, 2 years out, but it feels both really far away and still fresh. And I'm sorting this out, I think. One thing that comes to mind that wasn't mentioned is I found myself feeling really anxious. So I wasn't really. So I had been diagnosed a couple of years earlier with a chronic neurological disease, and it impacts my everyday. So I have to like really do a lot of calculating and juggling to figure out, am I going to have enough energy to drive a certain place? What do I have to do? How do I work? Everything is different now. And it's a puzzle that I'm always dealing with. It's every single day. So I had been through this experience where I'd had a life-changing diagnosis, but it wasn't cancer. Like I wasn't going to die from it potentially. So it was really different. But I think that experience made me like get over the, why did this happen? How did it happen to me? I like kind of processed a lot of that in my life already. So I skipped that because I was like, stuff happens. Here it is again. Like, let's get through the cancer part. But what I found was kind of two big emotions that were surprising to me were this anxiety. So I probably always had low level anxiety in my life, but was able to like push through, persevere, deal with it pretty well, channel it into being really effective in my work and in my life. But cancer kind of pushed that over the edge, where I was like, I need to talk to someone. And I reached out to it was the PA that I was working with, and I just said, like, is there someone, can you recommend someone that I can talk to who's worked with cancer patients? And I would highly recommend that, like having somebody who had worked with cancer patients with similar fears who could say, oh, that's so normal. I hear people say this, and sometimes they say this. It was really reassuring to me. So that was really helpful in dealing with anxiety, just getting regular counseling or working with a social worker. So that was really helpful with anxiety. And then the other emotion that I was surprised by was anger. So I found myself just being like raging angry at times. And that is not my normal personality at all. I'm pretty even keel. I can get fired up about stuff, but mostly I'm excited. Like I'm a really enthusiastic person. And I found myself just mad. And I would be mad at normal moms in my life who were upset about like what to feed their babies. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like I'm hoping that I'm around to worry about what I can give my child for food. So it just found like I found it really hard. I thought I was going to be like having this new mom experience, and I was a new mom going through cancer. So I was like a young person going through, like fairly young, going through cancer. And then I wasn't able to relate to any of the moms in my life. And like all these factors just left me feeling really angry. And so working through that with my counselor was also really helpful. And she gave me this great visual of, she talked about how anger is usually, you can think of it like the tip of an iceberg. And it's the easiest emotion to recognize, but there's a lot more going on under the surface. So if you're finding yourself really angry, there's probably more to dig into. And having someone who can walk you through that, I think is really helpful, because now every so often that still bubbles up for me, but it's so much less. And I didn't want to become an angry person. So I'm glad that that is not how I feel today. That there's been a transformation there for sure.
Great, thank you all so much. And I think that's a kind of a good segue into the next question here, is a little bit about caregivers in the cancer journey. So certainly we talked about the team and the trust and then the emotions that you feel, but there's people that you live with as well. And I just want to make a note for the participants that we do have a separate panel on caregivers, and you'll be able to watch that. All the sessions will be online, but wanted to hear from the folks here. Talk about the caregiver experience from your perspective. Louis, do you want to start, please?
Certainly, I can do that. Well, I have more experience as a survivor than I do as a caregiver, even though technically I've walked in both worlds. Of course, with kind of having some idea of witnessing what my parents went through when I was going through the bone marrow transplant and the cancer treatment leading up to it. Even though I'm sure there's a lot more that they experienced that I don't know than what I do know, and that's in a lot of respects. If they were alive today, I'm sure they would probably say that was by design, in a sense of just like any parent wants to protect their child. But from this caregiver standpoint, the experience I had with that was my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. Unfortunately, it was too late to really do much of anything about it. But she was diagnosed with lung cancer it must have been in September of 2005, and she ultimately passed in November of 2005. But in that aspect, having known both worlds, I can see in a lot of respects, I think it would be a lot more difficult, or it is a lot more difficult in many respects, being a caregiver. I mean, each journey is unique. I don't want to say that, and I don't really, excuse me, mean to say that one is worse or more difficult than the other. But from my perspective, I would think in a lot of respects, the caregiver journey certainly has its own challenges. And one of the biggest challenges, I would think, and from my experience as well too, is that not that as the survivor, it's him or herself necessarily has a whole lot of control over what's going on, but just the feelings, sometimes the feelings of helplessness and feeling of apart and caregiving itself and advocating for someone is certainly doing something, but perhaps is sometimes those moments of helplessness as a caregiver, we're feeling that there's so much that's out of one's control and there's very little that one can actually do. So I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge from a caregiver perspective.
Miranda or Brandy, if either of you want to jump in.
I'll just, to build on what Louis said, I know, so my husband was one of my main caregivers, and I agree, like, I think it was very challenging for him, and just as challenging as it was, just in different ways as it was for me. One difference that I noticed is, as the survivor, people reached out to me and wanted to know what I needed and how to help. But really, no one reached out to my husband, even good friends. And I was so disappointed in that, of like, you give him a call. Like, I actually just was like, you need to call and check in on him. That's what I need you to do for me. But I was so frustrated that I had to say that, because he really did need that support. He had a lot on his plate and was expected to still go to work and like do all these things. And he had extra care for our son and all this stuff. So I think that was the difference. One other thing I would say about caregivers and the role of caregivers in my cancer experience, I thought about it like having a few main caregivers. So I'll share that in case it's helpful to anyone. So I mentioned my husband. I was lucky to have my mom available too. She lived 2 hours away, but I could call her and she came and visited and stayed when she could. And then a really dear friend, an amazing friend who was there for me. That was really helpful. And I think it was nice, like sometimes people say you can't get everything you need in life from your partner, you need other people. And I think kind of the same thing applies for a caregiver. It was really nice to have people that I could go to, this team, for when I had different needs. That was really, really helpful. And I think helped them not feel like they had support amongst each other too.
Brandy?
Yes. Okay. So I love this. This is probably one of the most favorite topics I like to talk about, because I know how important it is for the caretakers or the individuals that's your support system. So mine are very extreme. It's very great and very kind of bad. So I'm going to touch on both. So the good part was, so my mother was there as well. She actually ended up quitting her job, leaving everything in Texas and coming to take care of me at Walter Reed Medical Center, which was located in DC at the time in 2009. So she came, she took care of me, and she was my entire support system. She did a very great job. I honestly believe that if I did not have her there with me every single step of the way, like her and I, we were together the entire time. We went through that experience together. But I was also married at the time to my ex-husband, and he was having an affair, and he was planning on leaving me because he thought I was going to die. So I was going through a whole lot of emotional distress and pain, and I'm fighting for my life, and my ex-husband's out there, doing whatever he's doing, could really care less about me because he thinks I'm going to pass away. So that was also really hard as well, but he was going through his own trauma. So I've heard a lot about this. I've done a lot of research that I'm not going to say it's normal, but it's not like it's unheard of for a spouse to kind of step out and step away when a trauma or something traumatic is happening health-wise. So that was something that was really hard. But my mom was there for me as well. But after chemotherapy was done, treatment was finished, I was considered cancer-free. My mom had to put on a brave face for the entire 10 months. I didn't see her cry one time. Nobody checked on her for anything. She had to be the foundation for everything. And when treatment was done, she would be very upset at me for sharing this, but I'm going to do it because it's my story and this is what happened. She tried to commit suicide, and I found her in my room upstairs she had taken a huge, a big bottle of my Lunesta, my sleeping pills that I had. She was so torn. She was so tired. She was so drained. She was so neglected that nobody cared to give her a call. No one asked her how she was doing. So I feel like it's not only important to check on the cancer patient, but the individuals that are taking care of you, your caretakers, because they matter too. You're not only going through the trauma, your family, your friends, your children, like everybody deserves to be seen and heard and have their feelings acknowledged in a nurturing environment. So I just know that it's so important to not forget about the support system, because they are equally affected as well. And if anything, people forget about them because it's not them getting the chemotherapy and the poison running down their body and all of that stuff, but they also matter. So just don't forget about them. I think that's so important that we acknowledge them and give them the help that they need, because it matters.
Thank you so much for all those input for patients that are on this call today. I think it's so important to know exactly where you're coming from and where they're at and where they're coming from. So I think it's so important to know how those feelings are true. And thank you. So question for Lewis. When you are speaking with other cancer survivors, what are some of the most common fears and concerns that people talk to you about?
Well, speaking generally, and it's been a while since I've had a chance to really visit with many other cancer survivors, and it seems like when it comes up, it's kind of one here, one there. It's not something that happens all that consistently.
Sure.
But of course, I'd say the biggest issue that most people are concerned about, no matter where they are in their cancer journey, and it tends to be more prevalent, I think, though, in people who are fairly early in their survivorship journey rather than people who've been out a ways, and of course, accounting for individual differences. The biggest issue, of course, too, or biggest concern people have is recurrence or another form of cancer developing and such like that. So that's probably the primary issue as well, too. But then, again, speaking primarily from the standpoint of people who are earlier in their survivorship journey, is whatever their life situation is kind of like what is life going to be like going forward, and what are some of the different changes that might occur, within oneself going forward. And again, kind of ties back into the previous concern about recurrence and such like that. But just, I remember like one concern that I had, especially earlier on in my journey, was the concern about, not so much about the concern about a specific reoccurrence, but it's effectively, is this going to effectively stalk me for the remainder of my life? Now, thankfully, for whatever reason, fairly early on in the situation, that went away, thankfully, for the most part. But that is probably the number one concern I would say that most people have in their survivorship journey that they've shared with me when we talk about it, is in terms of recurrence and overall quality of life issues and such like that.
Thank you, Lewis. Brandy, do you have any input on some of what you've heard about the most common fears or concerns?
Yeah, so of course it's returning, quality of life, but I've also gotten questions about like, what do you eat now? What are you drinking? Like, what's your diet look like? And how are you maintaining your stress levels? And, do you go to therapy? So it's kind of more like, what are you doing every single day to keep it gone? And so I try to explain, I feel like cancer is a very unique disease, right? You can be the most healthiest person and get cancer. You can be the most, not financially stable. You can be the richest. Like, it doesn't matter what your status is, what you look like, your religion, none of that, because it's like an aimless bullet and it goes anywhere. It attacks everybody and anything. So I just try to let them know that it comes in all different forms, in all different ways. So just being able to, for me, it's about preventative maintenance. And that looks like good mental health. That is, managing your stress. That is going on walks. That is doing things that bring you pleasure, things that make you happy. And if eating a salami sandwich makes you amazing and feel great, then that's what you need to do. If watching, amazing, funny, hilarious stories and laughing your heart out is what you need to do, then that's what I think you should do. I think it's just finding those things that bring you joy, make you feel good, and just bring value to your life and make you happy. So whatever that is, that's what people need to do. Because what makes me happy is working out and being really strenuous and taking my dogs on walks for 4 miles. But that might not be what, the next person wants to do. Maybe they want to bake cookies all day and they want to decorate the house, or they want to do pottery, so I just think it's important to have a good balance of whatever it is, and to manage the stress and make sure your life is full of things that bring you joy. And that's what I tell people to do. That's how I've done it. So there's no magic cookie cutter anything. Everybody's different. And whatever makes you happy is what I think people should be doing.
That's great. I love hearing all of that. It's so wonderful for everyone. Miranda, would you have any input on any
No, I think we can move on. Those are great answers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to echo Iris's chat that we are coming to close soon. So if there are any Q&A from the audience, if you could put those, there was so much activity in chat, we may have missed if there were questions in there. So please, if you could go to the Q&A and submit a question. But I think we will, that the question of if we could leave attendees with just one thing after this event, and that kind of tags on Brandy, maybe your answer was part in there, but Miranda and Louie, if you could leave just one nugget with audience members, what would that be? Miranda, I'll start with you.
Yeah. You know, when I was thinking about this question, it's just like, what do I know? I don't know what I know, but here's what comes to mind. So for what it's worth, I think like cancer is a clarifying experience, and that suddenly for me, at least, it became even clearer what I valued and what I cared about and what I prioritized. So I try to like really hold those things dear. I love what Brandy said about finding what makes you joyful. And I think even like writing those things down and going back to them when you need them, because you've just learned how to persevere through really difficult times, and you could keep doing that, but why? So reminding yourself that like now is the time to let that joy back in and to bring back those things that feel good and healthy and nourishing, and you deserve it. And so do the people around you, and you'll be stronger for them if you do those things and invite them to do them with you and bring your caregivers into that. I think that's a really big thing. So bringing back that joy. And then for me, mindfulness has been a big piece. I rolled my eyes at that before cancer. I was like, I will never meditate. No, thank you. That's super nice that you do that. But I fall asleep if I meditate, like, But I have meditated for 5 minutes every day for 2 years straight because I just did it for 5 minutes every day. So doing a teeny little chunk, 5 minutes every day is a whole lot of minutes after 2 years. I've missed 2 days. There are pretty good reasons to miss, but otherwise every day. So like finding something and trying a little bit, it doesn't have to be a huge goal, but that can really change your life. It's been so helpful. So that's a piece. Try a 5-minute meditation.
Great, thank you. And I love that you deserve it, right? Like we all deserve to find that joy and that wellness, whatever it looks like, but we deserve it. Yeah, Louie, would you like to leave the audience members with one piece of wisdom?
Well, the one piece of wisdom that I would share, and again, thanks again to Miranda for the beauty in what she just shared as well too. And I was going to say something along those lines as well too, but she's already covered that. So I guess what I would say as well too is just kind of again piggybacking off what she said is just living life to the fullest and making the best use of the second chance that we've gotten. But then also as well too is just to always be good and to be kind to oneself. I know it's often easier said than done, but just to really take care of oneself in all possible ways, and also as well too, and just part of that as well too. And I know that everyone is different in terms of like how much social interaction they like, but my advice to be as well too is even well past their survivorship journey, just surround yourself with good people and just build the strongest support system you can. It's amazing how important that can be, especially both in the early days and even years later. So that's just the piece of advice I would leave everybody with. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions in the chat that I'd like to get to. The first question, and this can be for either one or any of you guys. How do you respond to others, family members, etc., who want you to be done and never mention it again? Does anybody have any input?
I would say, don't talk to them about it. Don't talk to them about it. If they're going to not acknowledge your feelings and you don't feel heard, talk to somebody else. There's always cancer groups. There's still some social media. There's other means to speak to people. And if you feel like you're not getting the support you need, you can always go outside of your home to talk.
Thank you, Brandy. And one more question for Miranda. How do you deal with the commercials for drugs that treat metastatic breast cancer? The annoying frighten me, and they are a reminder of what may happen.
Yeah. Oh gosh, those commercials, especially through treatment, they just stab me right in the heart. So I don't watch TV live a ton, so I do just miss them. But when I'm at my parents', I see them. And I guess what I've tried, so that's interesting that you asked, because I haven't really been conscious about this. I think what I do is I like kind of in that moment that it's on, I usually step away. So I don't sit and watch the commercial. I give myself a break from it. And I'm like, that's totally fine to do. I don't have to be able to handle this and watch it. But then I try to just make it into a moment of being like, I'm so glad that those drugs exist for the people who need them. And just because they're out there doesn't mean that I'm going to need them someday. like their story is not my story, and I'm going to take some space from this commercial. So I hope that helps. They are triggering. Yeah.
Okay, you guys, with that, we are right at time. And I just want to say thank you, Louie. Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Miranda. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Iris, for facilitating. Thank you to the attendees for coming. This has been fantastic. And I just thank you all so much.
Thank you.
This was
Thank you.
fantastic. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all. Have
you.
a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.